For centuries, the galaxy believed humanity was weak, insignificant. They sent their fleets. They demanded surrender. They thought Earth would kneel. Then, humanity answered. No warnings. No mercy. No second chances. Now the galaxy watches in fear because they know one terrifying truth. If you strike a Earth, you will not survive the answer. In a single night, an empire fell, and the stars would never be the same again. The ultimatum arrived without warning. A holographic projection materialized in every major human city, on every colony world, and aboard every Terran warship. The figure that appeared was tall, imposing, its elongated skull crowned with ceremonial plating, a Zelver warlord. Its 4 burning eyes radiated contempt as it delivered the message that had echoed across the galaxy for millennia. Humans of soul, you stand at the edge of history. The galactic hegemony has deemed your species unfit for sovereignty. You have one cycle to submit, to kneel before your betters, and accept your place under our rule. Refuse, and your worlds will burn. The transmission cut out, leaving silence in its wake. Humanity had received many messages before, calls for trade, diplomacy, cooperation. But this was the first time the stars had spoken in the language of conquest. The question was simple. Would Earth surrender? The hegemony's miscalculation. Admiral Richard Kane stood on the bridge of the UNS Vigilant, Earth's most advanced warship, his jaw tight as he replayed the message. Around him, his officers watched in grim silence. They expect us to fold, Kane muttered. To kneel, just like the others. The Zelver were the ruling force of the galaxy, having crushed thousands of civilizations beneath their heel. They had enslaved entire species, erased cultures, rewritten history to fit their dominance. And yet, they had made a fatal error. They thought Earth was like the others. Kane exhaled slowly. Comms, open a line to High Command. A moment later, the face of Fleet Admiral Sophia Caldwell appeared on the holo display. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled into a tight bun, her expression unreadable. You've seen it, Kane said. It wasn't a question. I have, she replied. The council is in session. Some believe diplomacy is the best course. Others. She gave him a knowing look. Kane's voice was firm. We both know diplomacy isn't an option. The hegemony doesn't negotiate. They assimilate. Caldwell nodded. Then we must prepare our answer. The officers on the bridge straightened. There was no fear in their eyes, only determination. Kane turned back to the vast emptiness of space beyond the viewport. The Zelver expected compliance, but they would receive something else entirely. They would learn what it meant to threaten Earth, a galaxy that underestimated humanity. On the Zelver homeworld, Supreme Warlord Virex stood before his grand war table, studying the projections of the Sol system. The humans were isolated, untested in galactic warfare. Their ships were inferior, their technology primitive compared to the might of the hegemony. Victory was inevitable. One of his advisors, a thin, insectoid creature named Krex, shifted nervously. High Lord, there are concerning reports about humanity's history. Their wars, their adaptability. Virex scoffed. History is meaningless. The only history that matters is the one written by the victors. And we are the only victors. The chamber erupted in cruel laughter. But somewhere, deep in the void of space, humanity was already preparing to answer. And the galaxy was about to realize, some wars are not won by strength alone. What happens when the hegemony finally sees what humans are capable of? Will they regret their arrogance, or will it be too late? The Zelver fleet arrived in Sol, expecting a surrender. Instead, they found nothing but silence. Thousands of warships emerged from a void, their hulls gleaming under the distant light of Sol. The fleet was vast, a testament to the hegemony's dominance. Massive dreadnoughts bristling with weapons, cruisers forming tight formations, and fighter squadrons swarming like locusts. They moved with the confidence of a species that had never known defeat. On the bridge of the Zelver flagship Vorik Prime, High Lord Virex stood with his arms crossed, his 4 eyes scanning the empty expanse before them. No human fleet waited to oppose them. No defenses were raised. The planet itself, blue and fragile beneath them, remained eerily still. It was almost disappointing. Virex let out a low chuckle. They are afraid. His second-in-command, a reptilian strategist named Lorvek, nodded. It seems they have chosen to cower in silence. It is wise. They know resistance is futile. Virex turned to his communications officer. Broadcast the final demand. The officer pressed a series of glyphs, and across human space, the message was sent. Your time is up. Kneel before the hegemony or face total annihilation. And then they waited. Seconds passed. Then minutes. Still, there was no response. Silence was not submission. Lorvek frowned. Odd. They should have responded by now. Virex barely spared him a glance. Perhaps they are simply too afraid to speak. But even as he said the words, something felt wrong. The Zelver had conquered hundreds of species, and the pattern was always the same. Pleas for mercy, desperate negotiations, frantic evacuations. But the humans had done none of that. There were no distress signals, no refugee ships fleeing into deep space. Just silence. And silence, Virex realized, was not surrender. It was a strategy. Suddenly, one of the officers snapped to attention. High Lord, I'm detecting. The ship shook violently. Alarms blared. The red glow of emergency lighting filled the bridge. Virex staggered, gripping the command console. Report. The tactical officer's voice was tight with panic. Explosion detected. One of our destroyers is gone. Virex whipped around to the viewport. In the distance, where the Zenras might had once floated, there was now only fire and debris. Lorvek hissed. An attack? From where? No enemy ships were visible. No weapons had been fired. It was as if the destroyer had simply ceased to exist. And then another explosion. And another. One by one, Zelver warships were vanishing in blinding flashes of destruction. The Ghost Fleet strikes. Panic spread through the Zelver command network. Sensors swept the void, searching for an enemy that wasn't there. And then, as if emerging from the darkness itself, the first Terran warships appeared. They materialized from behind the gas giant Jupiter, from the asteroid belt, from deep space positions the Zelver had never even considered. Human vessels moved like shadows, their hulls coated in sensor-disrupting technology. The USS Revenant led the charge, its railguns igniting as tungsten slugs tore through Zelver shields like paper. From the USS Vigilant, Admiral Kane watched as chaos unfolded. Fire at will, he ordered. Let them see what answering humanity means. Human warships didn't fight like the hegemony's forces. They didn't line up in grand formations or rely on overwhelming numbers. They struck from the dark, hitting precise targets, crippling the enemy's command structure before the battle even began. The Zelver had come expecting a slow, ritualistic conquest. Instead, they were being dissected with surgical precision. And then came the final blow. The trap closes. Virex watched in horror as his forces crumbled. Their dreadnoughts, the pride of the hegemony, were being cut apart by human bombers weaving through their defenses. Every attempt at retreat was blocked. Every counterattack was anticipated. This isn't possible, he whispered. But it was. The humans had not been silent out of fear. They had been waiting, planning. And now they were answering in a way the galaxy would never forget. What happens when a predator realizes it is no longer the hunter, but the prey? The Zelver fleet, once an unstoppable force, was unraveling in real time. Aboard the Vorik Prime, High Lord Virex clutched the command console, his claws digging into the metal. The bridge was chaos, officers shouting, alarms blaring, tactical displays flashing red as ship after ship vanished from existence. This was not how it was supposed to go. This was not war. War was supposed to be grand, strategic, a contest of strength, tactics, and endurance. War was supposed to be fleets colliding in glorious battle, worlds exchanging fire, a slow march toward inevitable victory. Instead, the humans had turned it into something else entirely. Something precise, surgical, Cold. A massacre. The unseen blade. Where are they? Virex roared, his four eyes scanning the holographic display. Where's their fleet? It made no sense. His forces outnumbered the humans at least 5-1. Yet every attempt to track them, to retaliate, met with failure. The answer came in a single word from his intelligence officer. They're everywhere. Virex turned sharply. What? The officer's mandibles twitched in fear. Sir, they aren't engaging like a traditional fleet. They're striking in micro-engagements, overwhelming our sensors. Their ships are using advanced stealth tech, attacking in coordinated waves. By the time we identify one, 3 more have already moved. Virex gritted his teeth. Impossible. No species fights like this. But that was the problem. Humans weren't like any species they had encountered. The Terran offensive. Across the battlefield, the human fleet moved like ghosts. On the bridge of the USS Revenant, Captain Elise Navarro stood with her arms crossed, watching as her forces dissected the Zelver war machine with ruthless efficiency. Next target, her tactical officer asked. Navarro barely hesitated. Their rear-line command vessels. Cut the head off, and the body will collapse. The Revenant fired. A single railgun slug, accelerated to a fraction of light speed, punched through the Zelver command ship's shield as if it were paper. A second later, the vessel detonated in a silent explosion, its debris scattering into the void. Admiral Kane's voice crackled over the comms. Status. Navarro smirked. They're dying fast, sir. Kane exhaled slowly. Maintain pressure. No survivors. That was the difference between the Zelver and humanity. The Zelver fought wars for conquest. Humans fought wars to end them. The breaking point. On the Vorik Prime, panic had taken hold. We have to fall back. Lorvek shouted. Virex whirled on him. We are the hegemony. We do not retreat. Lorvek's reptilian eyes darkened. Then we die. Another explosion rocked the ship. The shields were failing. The defenses were crumbling. All across the fleet, Zelver captains were abandoning formation, scrambling to escape the nightmare that had descended upon them. It was useless. Humanity had planned for this moment. Every escape vector was already covered. For the first time in his life, High Lord Virex felt something unfamiliar. Not anger, not arrogance, fear. The final transmission. A new signal echoed across the battlefield. Not from the Zelver, from Earth. It was a simple message, broadcast in every known galactic language. To the hegemony. This is what happens when you mistake our silence for weakness. Virex stared, frozen, as the meaning sank in. Humanity had never intended to negotiate. They had never been afraid. They had been waiting. And now they had answered. End of a dynasty. The Vorik Prime's hull groaned, alarms wailing as fires spread through the corridors. The once mighty flagship of the hegemony was on its last breath. Virex's claws tightened into fists. This cannot be. His words went unheard, because at that moment the USS Vigilant fired its final shot. A tungsten slug, moving at near relativistic speed, tore through the Zelver flagship, piercing its core reactor. The ship detonated in a flash of white-hot fire, its pieces scattering into the darkness of space. And just like that, the war was over. The hegemony was dead. The question that remained. As the silence settled over the wreckage, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. For thousands of years, the Zelver had ruled through terror. They had believed they were the apex predators of the stars. But now, the entire cosmos had just witnessed the truth. Humanity had been underestimated. Humanity had been threatened. And when the time came, humanity had answered. The only question now was simple. What would the galaxy do next? Across the stars, news of the Zelver's defeat spread like wildfire. The once mighty warlords of the hegemony, who had ruled with absolute authority, were gone. Their fleets had been reduced to debris, their worlds left vulnerable. For the first time in recorded history, the unchallenged rulers of the galaxy had been utterly and completely broken. But it was not just their destruction that sent shockwaves across the cosmos. It was how it had happened. The humans had not fought a desperate war of survival. They had not pleaded, bargained, or begged for mercy. They had waited, planned, and when the time came, they had struck with such overwhelming precision that the hegemony had ceased to exist in mere hours. Now every empire, every species, every civilization that had once viewed humanity as a minor, irrelevant race was asking the same question. What happens next? The Council's dilemma. On the neutral world of Voltrian Prime, the Galactic Council convened in emergency session. The chamber, usually filled with political posturing and debate, was silent with unease. Representatives of 100 species sat around the great circular table, their gazes fixed on the holographic projection hovering above them. The battle footage played in an endless loop, Zelver warships vanishing in bursts of fire, human vessels moving like wraiths, an entire fleet obliterated before it even understood what was happening. In the center of the chamber, Chancellor Orvos, an elder of the Varnathi Dominion, exhaled slowly. His species had existed for millennia, watching empires rise and fall. But never had he seen anything like this. He turned his many eyes toward his advisors. This changes everything. The speaker from the Jorvath Consortium, a reptilian diplomat, hissed in agreement. Humanity was supposed to be primitive, untested. We assumed their isolation meant weakness. It did not, another voice muttered. Silence followed. Then, the question everyone had been dreading was finally spoken. What if they are not done? Humanity's silence speaks volumes. The most terrifying part of it all was that Earth had made no further move. They had not claimed new territories. They had not demanded submission. They had not even responded to the Council's attempts at diplomacy. They simply waited. And somehow that was worse. The Zelver had ruled through fear. When they conquered, they made their demands immediately, ensuring all species knew their place beneath them. But the humans? The humans had just destroyed the greatest empire in the galaxy, and said nothing. It left every major power uncertain, afraid. Did humanity intend to rule? Were they merely avenging an insult? Or was this the beginning of something far greater? No one knew. And that unknown was far more terrifying than any war. The message that changed everything. For 3 days, the galaxy held its breath. And then, without warning, a transmission came. Not from the Galactic Council. Not from any remaining Zelver remnants. From Earth. The council chambers fell deathly silent as the message played. A single human figure stood before them. A man in a crisp black uniform. The insignia of the United Terran Command displayed proudly on his chest. His expression was calm, unreadable. His words, however, sent a chill through every being that heard them. The war is over. Humanity has no interest in conquest, nor in ruling over others. But make no mistake, this was your warning. Do not mistake our silence for compliance. Do not mistake our patience for fear. He leaned forward slightly, his voice turning colder. We do not seek war. But if you bring it to us, we will end it. The transmission ended. For a long moment, the chamber remained frozen. Then slowly, Chancellor Orvos exhaled, his many eyes closing in resignation. This, he murmured, is the birth of a new era. The unspoken truth. Across the galaxy, governments scrambled to reassess their stance on humanity. Some sought alliances. Some debated preemptive action. Others simply watched and waited, unsure of what was to come. But deep in their hearts, they all knew the truth. Humanity had been ignored for centuries, dismissed, looked down upon, and in one swift, merciless stroke, they had erased the oldest empire in the stars. They had given their answer, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The question that remained, as the council disbanded and the diplomats returned to their worlds, one final question lingered in the air, unspoken but ever present. If this was how humanity defended itself, what would happen if they ever decided to expand? In the wake of the hegemony's destruction, the stars had fallen into an uneasy silence. The great empires, once confident in their dominion, now whispered in the shadows. Every major species had spent centuries preparing for the expected. Wars of expansion, economic rivalries, political upheavals. But no one had prepared for what had just happened. The greatest military power in the galaxy had been wiped from existence in a single night. And the ones responsible? They weren't demanding tribute. They weren't claiming dominion. They simply waited. And the longer Earth remained silent, the more terrifying the unknown became. The councils divide. The Galactic Council was fractured. Once a stage for bureaucratic maneuvering and political games, it had become something far more desperate. Old alliances were crumbling. New factions were rising. The question on every diplomat's mind was no longer one of control, but of survival. Deep within the marble halls of the council chambers on Voltrian Prime, an emergency session had been called. This time, it wasn't just politicians who filled the room. Military leaders, intelligence directors, and high-ranking strategists from across the stars had gathered. The room was a battlefield of words. They must be contained, growled High Strategist Morvek of the Trilliad Dominion, his deep voice vibrating through the chamber. We allowed the Zelver to handle them, and now they're gone. If we do nothing, Earth will become a power beyond reckoning. Across the room, Grand Admiral Saren of the Varnathi Dominion leaned back in her seat, eyes sharp with thought. Contain them? And how do you propose to do that, Morvek? The hegemony threw their full strength at humanity and were erased. What do you think we can do that they could not? A tense silence fell. They all knew the truth, even if they refused to speak it. There was no force in the galaxy prepared to fight humanity. Not now. And worse, no one understood how humanity had done it. The nightmare of war. Across dozens of worlds, military analysts and intelligence agencies worked tirelessly, dissecting every second of the battle. But the deeper they looked, the more disturbing the truth became. Humanity had not won through brute force. They had not overwhelmed the Zelver with sheer numbers or superior firepower. They had eliminated them with chilling precision, using strategies and technologies the rest of the galaxy barely understood. No massive armadas. No grand declarations. Just the silent, methodical dismantling of an empire that had ruled for 1,000 years. How do you fight an enemy that sees your every move before you make it? One military strategist muttered in horror. No one had an answer. The fractured alliances. Paranoia seeped into the cracks of every galactic power. The once mighty coalitions that had maintained order began to unravel. Some factions called for an alliance with humanity, believing diplomacy was the only path to survival. Others spoke in hushed voices of secret projects, desperate attempts to develop countermeasures before it was too late. And then there were those who whispered of war. Not now, not yet, but eventually. There were still those who believed that humanity, despite all their terrifying capabilities, was still young, still inexperienced. If the galaxy struck first, they might still have a chance. The watching eyes of Earth, unknown to the Council, to the strategists, to the terrified leaders across the stars, humanity was watching. On Earth, deep beneath the fortified bunkers of the United Terran Command, Admiral Kane sat in a darkened room, watching live feeds of every major power in the galaxy. He saw the arguments. He heard the threats. He studied the desperate attempts to understand what had happened. And he smiled, because this was exactly what humanity had wanted. Fear was a weapon, and right now, the galaxy was drowning in it. Kane turned to his advisors, his voice calm. They're going to panic. Some will try to ally with us. Others will scheme behind our backs. A few will prepare for war. He let the silence linger before speaking again. Let them. The others nodded. The trap had already been set. The future belongs to the patient. Humanity had never desired conquest, but they also had no intention of letting the galaxy dictate their future. For centuries, they had been underestimated, ignored, dismissed. That would never happen again. Now the galaxy stood on the edge of a precipice, unsure whether Earth was a friend or a looming specter in the dark. But humanity? Humanity had already decided. They would wait. Watch. Let the galaxy tear itself apart with paranoia and fear. And when the time was right, they would answer. Again. One final question. As the council debated, as militaries scrambled for solutions, as fear gripped the stars, one terrifying question remained. Had humanity just won a single battle? Or had they already won the war without ever needing to fight it? For centuries, the great civilizations of the stars had ruled through domination, through fleets, armies, and the iron grip of authority. War was a means to an end, a tool used to bend the weak to the will of the strong. But the war with humanity had shattered that illusion. There had been no great battlefields, no drawn-out sieges, no desperate last stands. There had only been silence. And then, in a single night, the Zelver hegemony, the greatest military force the galaxy had ever known, was gone. Now, the galaxy stood at the edge of an abyss, staring into the unknown. Would humanity reach out a hand in friendship? Or would they strike again, and this time leave no survivors? The Council's last stand. The Grand Hall of the Galactic Council was filled with an oppressive tension. Representatives from every major power sat in uneasy silence, their gazes flickering toward the massive display at the center of the chamber. It was an official summons from Earth. No threats, no ultimatums, just an invitation. The first time humanity had ever called the council to them. Chancellor Orvos, the elder statesman of the Varnathi Dominion, sat at the head of the chamber. His many eyes flickered with exhaustion as he addressed the gathered leaders. "We must answer," he said simply. Across the room, High Strategist Morvek of the Trillia Dominion clenched his mandibles. "They seek to make us kneel." "Do they?" Grand Admiral Saren asked, her voice calm. "If they desired our destruction, would we even be here?" No one had an answer, because the truth was terrifying. If humanity had wanted the galaxy to burn, it already would have. The meeting on Terra. The representatives arrived at Earth under heavy escort. Dozens of warships flanked them as they descended into Earth's atmosphere, a silent reminder of the power they had failed to understand. They were brought to a vast conference hall, built not in arrogance, but in precision, every inch of it designed to ensure that those who entered understood exactly who they were dealing with. At the far end of the room, a single figure awaited them. Admiral Kane, humanity's voice. He wasted no time with pleasantries. "You fear us," he said, his voice steady. No one denied it. "You should." A ripple of unease passed through the gathered diplomats. Kane leaned forward, his gaze sweeping across the room. "For centuries, we watched. We listened. We learned." His voice remained level, but the weight of his words pressed down on them like a force of gravity. "When the Zelver came for us, we could have pleaded. We could have tried to negotiate. We could have played the games you all play." He shook his head. "But that is not who we are." Silence. And then, the final blow. The hegemony made a choice. We responded. He let the words hang for a moment. Then he added, "Make sure you do not make the same mistake." The room was deathly quiet, because there it was, the real warning. The hegemony had not been an example. They had been a lesson. The last question. Chancellor Orvos was the first to speak, his voice slow and careful. "What do you want?" Kane studied him for a moment before answering. "Nothing." The answer stunned them. No demands? No claims of territory? No ultimatums? It made no sense. And that was what made it terrifying. Kane stood. "We are not conquerors. We do not seek to rule. We are content to remain as we are." A pause. "But if you bring war to us again." He let the sentence remain unfinished, because they all knew exactly how it ended. The galaxy's new order. The council returned to their worlds, shaken to their core. And across the stars, the message spread. Humanity did not seek power. They did not demand loyalty. They did not need control to be feared. Because the simple truth was this: they had already won. Not with fleets, not with armies, but with patience, with precision, with a single, undeniable truth that echoed across the void. If you strike at Earth, you will not survive the answer. And the galaxy would never forget it.